Hello, my dear gardening friends. Very often, when the house goes for sale and the garden is somewhat neglected, the decision is to clear everything out, cut down all the shrubs, reseed the soil, and let the future owners of the house envision their own garden spaces. So, the next owners come in and they look through the window at their garden, and as my favorite gardener from Great Britain says, Monty Don, they're waiting for the garden to begin, and it doesn't. So in this video, in this series of videos, I'm going to focus on how I design my garden, and each video would be focused on different aspects of garden design. How to create privacy in the garden, with the examples how I did it in my garden. How to create comfortable hardscaping. How to properly introduce plants into the garden. How to reduce the maintenance of the garden. So, a series of videos dedicated to different garden design aspects, and this series would be focused on my garden, how I did it. Just a disclaimer, I'm not a professional, a happy gardener who has jolly times with her garden, doing all the maintenance, designing and envisioning herself. I garden in zone 6-7, coastal Connecticut. So, this is my garden story. I garden on a fairly small piece of land, and by clever designs I was able to hide the boundaries of my garden. By creating different rooms in my garden, I was able to make it visually bigger. And there are certain advantages and disadvantages to having a small garden lot. And I can see that a lot of people can relate to my situation. A lot of us garden on smallish garden lot, and we want to make sure that it's private, it's comfortable, and it is bigger than it is. So, advantages and disadvantages of small garden. The disadvantages, let's start with those disadvantages. The disadvantages can be that, especially when it is a freshly developed lot, that everything is see-through. I found a photo of our garden when we moved 10 years ago here to this land, and here at the back there was just a fence here, there was one holly bush there, a very small yew tree, and here we had a row of hostas. The fence was running all the way through, there was nothing here, and just a tree there with 2 azaleas. So we could see all our neighbors. And I remember I shared with you before, we have 5 neighbors on both sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And literally we would see everything those neighbors were doing, especially in this direction. Everything was visible, you can see everything through the fence, and I can understand it is quite uncomfortable. It was quite uncomfortable. We have great neighbors, but privacy is needed for us and for them to enjoy great spaces. So one of the bad aspects of small space is it can be totally see-through. So certain steps has to be taken to make sure that the garden is somewhat private. The second disadvantage of small gardens is that it's difficult to fit all the structures into the landscape. For example, here, before all this area existed, there was a shed here, and that shed was literally taking space of half of the garden. It wasn't very functional, we were just keeping their garden equipment, and literally all this didn't exist because the shed was there, and it was taking half of the garden with it. So what we did, we decided to take that shed down, install all these raised beds, put all the shrubs and perennials here, and as a result we have a wonderful room in our garden to enjoy the sitting area. We also created this stone patio. We installed the sofa there, we installed the back paneling from different plants and sticks and fences, and this area turned into a wonderful space for the whole family to relax. Otherwise the shed would be taking so much space. So another disadvantage of small gardens is that it's difficult to fit different structures in because there is not much space. Now let's move to the advantages of small spaces. Well, small spaces are easier to maintain. You don't need so much money to maintain small spaces, and you can do it yourself. In my case, everything in my garden I do myself, and I jolly enjoy it. So the small garden can also fall into the same style very easily. You don't need to brainstorm which side of your garden you're doing in which style and how you're going to connect those styles together. Small garden can be designed in in one design, and it looks very harmoniously that way. No much money is needed to keep the garden functional and nice looking, which is also very nice. And another thing I find very convenient is that I can do all the jobs in the garden myself without asking for extra help from landscapers and contractors. This way I really enjoy all the processes in the garden, and I really know every little corner of my garden and the life of every little plant. So these are wonderful advantages of gardeners who garden on small lots. And I understand we can be intimidated by empty garden spaces, and my advice would be wait and think. Don't rush into the nursery and buy plants right away, because this is the most exciting thing to do. Wait and think and walk around your garden and try to envision what you want from your garden. So you can say that in this area I want my kids to have a little play area. In that area I want to entertain guests. Here I want to have some sort of a vegetable or herb garden. There I want this. So you spend time walking your empty lot and you think what you want from that lot, and then eventually the ideas will start coming into your head. And this situation is, I'm talking about not involving the professional garden designers. This situation is for you if you want to design your own garden, your own comfortable garden. So you give yourself time, you walk around your lot, you keep in mind that lot looks much bigger than the lot filled with plants. So you have to keep that in mind. You have to make sure that in the future, when you go to buy your plants, you make strong considerations of the mature size of plants and how to fit them into your landscape. But we will talk about it in our future videos. Here in our first video, we are just focusing on general rules, how to approach this monumental task of designing your own garden. I know the urge, and believe me, I was there. When the time finally comes to buy all the plants for your garden, to buy as many plants as you can, to introduce as much diversity into your back garden as you can. And I will advise you again not to do that, because our lot on which we garden is so small, and the amount of plants which we can fit in is somewhat limited. But not only the amount of plants, but the diversity of plants. Very often I drive by different people's gardens, and I see all sorts of colors and shapes fit into these little tight spaces, and it really looks jarred. It looks very filled landscape with all sorts of different shapes and colors, and it's very unpleasing for our eyes. So the advice is know from the very beginning, before even you start to design your garden, that you have to be limited in types of plants, in variety of plants you introduce into your garden. For example, the backbone of plants in my garden are boxwoods, arborvitaes, yews, roses, and some annuals, perennials here and there, and we have vegetable beds. So this is the backbone of my garden. These are the plants which are creating the structure in my garden. I would love to fit more different varieties of plants, but I know that if I would do that, my back garden wouldn't be as comfortable. It would be somewhat chaotic, and it wouldn't be a relaxing place for my family to have. And that's one of the biggest aspects which I demand from my garden, to have a relaxing space for my husband, for my kids to come and enjoy. Another suggestion for the gardeners who are facing their empty lots is to approach their spaces in the garden as a whole. And what I might mean is, very often, and I see it among my friend gardeners who are having difficulties with designing their back garden, envisioning their backyard, they say, okay, this year I'm going to focus on this section of my garden, and then next year I'm going to design that section of my garden, and next year I will do that. Well, I don't think that's a good idea to do, because eventually after 5-6 years you end up with these different spots in your garden which are not relating to each other, which are looking awkward, and there's no master plan to the garden. There's no one big picture to the garden. And meanwhile, years are going and you still don't achieve what you want from your garden. So my advice would be, when you come to this fairly empty lot, or you want to redesign your garden, you look at it as a whole and you say, okay, here I want, let's say, vegetable bed, and at the entrance to vegetable bed I want 2 Japanese hollies in these vertical shapes. Go ahead, do the section of the garden where you envision your vegetable garden, even if it's just on paper. Mark it out somehow and plant Japanese hollies on the entrance towards that area. This way, year after year, your Japanese hollies are growing there. You know that this is the beginning of your garden room, and then later in future years, you can go and design that area. So if you will do that, if you will use that first year with making sure that you are redefining different areas in your garden, and at least planting some long lasting shrubs and perennials which are going to grow year after year, that would be a good first step. And one more advice which I want to share in this video with you, my dear gardeners, is don't be afraid and intimidated to start designing your garden. I can see it a lot in people who are not happy with their backyards and they don't know where to begin, and as a result they don't begin. They just let whatever is growing in their garden mature in its own shape, and they do nothing about it. So don't be afraid to begin, and keep in mind, as long as you avoid major gardening design mistakes, nature is ready to cooperate. Plants are ready to be beautiful and play in harmony with each other. So as long as you don't make major garden mistakes, whatever you create in your garden will have a chance to be beautiful and will be harmonious and will play with each other. All the plants will play with each other well, because that's what plants do. They, in nature, they correlate with each other very well. So in a way, when you face this monumental task of designing or redesigning your garden, know that nature is on your side. My next video would be dedicated how I created the privacy in my backyard, and main rules, helpful tips, how to achieve that in your backyards. So stay tuned, happy gardening, and I will see you next time.